Jacob Walker lived with a quiet routine that rarely changed from one day to another. Every morning, before the sun had even risen above the snowy hills, he stepped outside to feed his horses and check the fences along his land. The cold air bit at his skin, but he welcomed the sting because it kept his mind busy and away from the heaviness he carried. Ever since his wife passed away 2 winters ago, the ranch felt too silent, and the days felt longer than they should. Only one person kept him moving forward, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was a small, bright-eyed girl who still found joy in the simplest things. She chased snowflakes, talked to the horses as if they were her closest friends, and always tried to make her father smile. Jacob tried his best to stay cheerful around her, but he knew she sensed his sadness, even when she didn't say it. With Christmas only a few days away, Lily felt determined to make this year special. Their little cabin had no decorations, except for a small pine branch she placed on the table. She kept telling her father that she had a plan, but she never explained what it was. Jacob, thinking she meant a handmade drawing or some small gift, simply nodded and encouraged her. It had snowed heavily the night before, covering everything in a soft white layer. The trees stood tall and silent. The wind moved slowly, and the world seemed peaceful for once. Lily put on her small boots, her coat, and her knitted scarf, one she made herself, and told Jacob she wanted to explore the woods behind their land. He allowed her, reminding her not to wander too far and to return before the sky turned gray. Lily promised, as she always did, and ran off with excitement. She loved walking through the snow, leaving a trail of tiny footprints behind her. She looked for pine cones, interesting rocks, or anything that could be special for Christmas. But today, something else caught her eye, something she did not expect to see at all. Near the edge of the forest, sitting under a tall pine tree whose branches bowed under the weight of snow, was a woman. Lily slowed her steps, unsure what she was looking at. The woman wore layered clothes that were torn at the edges, and her long dark hair fell over her shoulders. She seemed tired. Her posture slouched as if she had traveled far. Her skin was warm-toned, and her features matched those Jacob had described many times when teaching Lily about the different people who lived across the land. Lily realized she was Apache. The woman lifted her head slowly when she heard the crunch of snow under Lily's feet. Her expression was calm despite her exhaustion. She didn't move or say anything that would scare the little girl. Instead, she gave a small, gentle smile, one that made Lily feel safe, rather than frightened. Lily took a few steps closer, her heart beating fast, not from fear, but curiosity. "Hello," she said softly, her breath turning into small clouds in the cold air. The woman nodded. She seemed to understand but did not reply immediately. After a moment, she spoke a single word in a quiet voice. "Cold. Cold." Lily looked at her thin blanket, her snow-covered shoes, and her tired eyes. Even at 7 years old, she understood when someone needed help. She walked up to the woman and held out her hand. "Come with me," she said with childish confidence. "Daddy will help." The woman hesitated. She looked around the quiet forest, then back at the little girl. Lily's hand was small and warm, and her expression was open and trusting. The woman finally reached out, placing her hand in Lily's. She stood slowly, showing signs of weakness, as if she had walked many miles without rest. Lily guided her carefully through the woods, stopping now and then to ask if she was tired or if the snow was hurting her feet. The woman only shook her head, grateful but quiet. A sense of peace followed them as they walked, the forest muffling every sound except the soft crunch of their steps. When they reached the cabin, smoke was rising from the chimney, and Jacob was chopping firewood outside. He saw Lily and smiled, but the smile disappeared the moment he noticed the tall figure walking behind her. He froze with the axe in his hands, staring at the Apache woman who looked as if she had stepped out of a harsh winter struggle. "Lily," he said slowly, unsure if he was seeing correctly. "Who is this?" Lily ran to him, her face glowing with excitement. "Daddy! I brought you a Christmas gift." Jacob blinked, completely confused. "A what?" She pointed at the woman with both hands as if presenting a surprise. "Her. She needed help, and I thought, you would like her. And it's Christmas soon." The Apache woman lowered her gaze respectfully, understanding the situation even without words. She stepped back, not wanting to cause trouble. Jacob raised his hand gently, silently asking her not to step away. He set the axe aside and approached carefully. The woman looked cold, hungry, and exhausted. Her boots were worn, and her hands looked stiff from the cold. Jacob could see she had been through a difficult journey. He asked Lily to go inside and warm up while he talked to the woman. Lily nodded and ran into the cabin, leaving the two adults standing in the snow. Jacob spoke slowly and clearly, unsure how much she understood. "Are you hurt?" The woman shook her head. "Lost?" he asked. She nodded. Jacob sighed. He looked at her again and saw no threat, only someone who desperately needed shelter. He knew the town had complicated feelings toward the Apache people, but he also knew it would be wrong to leave anyone alone in the cold. He motioned toward the cabin. "Come inside. Warm up." The woman hesitated, then followed him through the door. Inside, the cabin was small but warm. The fire crackled inside the stone stove, filling the room with gentle heat. Lily sat on a stool, waiting eagerly. The woman stepped in slowly, her eyes scanning the room not with suspicion but with quiet appreciation. Jacob removed his hat and hung it by the door. He offered her a seat near the fire and placed a cup of warm water in her hands. She accepted it with both palms, her fingers trembling slightly from the warmth spreading into them. Lily climbed onto her father's lap as he sat beside her. "Isn't she nice?" Lily whispered. Jacob looked at the woman, her calm eyes, the quiet way she held herself, the exhaustion written across her features. She did not speak much, but her presence felt peaceful rather than dangerous. He nodded slowly. "Yes, she seems kind." Lily grinned proudly, happy that her gift pleased her father. Jacob tried asking more questions, using simple words and gestures. The woman finally shared her name, Nita. She explained softly, in broken English, that her husband had died from illness weeks earlier, and her small group had been separated during a storm. She had been walking alone for days, hoping to find safety. Jacob listened silently, feeling a tightness in his chest. He couldn't imagine wandering alone through the winter after such loss. As the fire warmed her hands and face, Nita looked more alive than she had in the forest. Lily kept bringing small things to show her: a wooden horse, a stone she liked, a little scarf she made herself. Nita smiled at each gift, her eyes softening. Jacob watched them, realizing how quickly Lily had accepted this stranger. Children didn't see danger, first they saw people. The hours passed quietly. The snow outside continued falling, and the wind howled softly through the trees. Inside the cabin, the warmth grew, and so did the strange but gentle connection forming among the three. When night arrived, Jacob prepared a small meal and shared it with Nita. She ate slowly, grateful for every bite. Lily fell asleep, leaning against Nita's arm, as if she had known her for years. Jacob looked at the two of them and exhaled deeply. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how the town would react if they learned he was sheltering an Apache widow. But for now, he knew one thing. He couldn't send her back into the snow. Not tonight. Not when his daughter had brought her home with such pure kindness. Not when the woman clearly needed someone to care. And not when deep down, he felt the cabin already becoming warmer, not just from the fire, but from the presence of someone who brought quiet peace into their cold winter. He whispered to himself, "Lily, you sure brought home some Christmas present." And with that, part one came to a gentle close, with all three resting under the same roof as the storm carried on outside. The next morning, the winter sun rose slowly, casting a pale golden light across the snow-covered land. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low during the night, leaving a soft glow of red embers. Jacob opened his eyes to find Lily curled up beside him on the floor, wrapped in her little blanket, and Nita sitting quietly near the fire, adding small pieces of wood to keep the warmth alive. She moved with careful gestures, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. Jacob sat up and rubbed his eyes. He still wasn't used to seeing someone else in his home. The cabin had felt empty for so long that even one extra person made it feel different, warmer, fuller, less lonely. And now there were two people filling that space. His daughter and this quiet Apache widow, who watched over the fire, as if protecting it. "Good morning," Jacob said softly. Nita turned and nodded with a small smile. "Morning." Her English was simple, but her voice carried a calm tone that made Jacob feel at ease. Lily woke up a moment later, stretching her arms. The moment she spotted Nita, her face lit up with excitement. She jumped to her feet and ran to sit beside her. "You're still here," Lily said happily. Nita nodded again, smiling kindly. She handed the girl a warm cup of water. Lily took it in both hands as if Nita were already part of the family. Jacob watched the scene with mixed feelings. He knew he did the right thing by letting Nita stay the night, but the more he watched his daughter attach herself to her, the more he wondered what would happen when Nita eventually left. Lily had lost her mother young. Jacob didn't want her heart broken again. After breakfast, Jacob put on his coat and stepped outside to check the livestock. The air was cold and sharp, but he welcomed it. He needed time to think. Snow covered most of the land, and the wind carried a chill that promised another storm might come soon. He worried about the safety of his ranch, but he also worried about Nita's safety if she ever stepped back into the wilderness alone. When he returned inside, he found Lily sitting on the floor with Nita, who was showing her how to weave thin strips of leftover cloth into a small braid. Lily's eyes were full of focus as she tried to follow the motions. Jacob leaned against the doorway silently, watching them. Something inside him felt lighter, seeing Lily so calm and content. He had not seen her this relaxed since his wife passed away. Nita noticed Jacob standing there and stopped her weaving. She lowered her hands respectfully, unsure if she should continue. Jacob shook his head gently. "It's fine," he said. "She likes learning." Nita nodded and continued teaching Lily. Jacob stepped inside and set his hat on the table. "I need to go into town later," he said. "Supplies are running low." Lily looked up immediately. "Can she come with us?" Jacob exchanged a quick glance with Nita. The widow lowered her gaze, quietly hoping the answer would be no. She knew towns were risky for her. Jacob knew it too. "Not today," Jacob said gently. "It's safer if she stays here." Lily's excitement faded a little, but she accepted the answer. The day passed slowly. Jacob chopped wood, Nita helped clean the small cabin, and Lily followed both of them, switching between chores and play. As she worked, Nita remained respectful and careful with everything she touched. She didn't want to intrude or take up space, but Jacob noticed she moved naturally around the cabin, as if she knew how to keep a home warm and peaceful. By midday, Jacob prepared his horse to ride into town. The air smelled of new snow, and the sky had begun to turn gray again. He didn't want to be gone long. Before leaving, he spoke to Nita. "You'll be safe here," he said. "But if someone rides by, stay inside. I don't want trouble." Nita nodded with understanding. "I stay," she said. Lily hugged him tightly. "Come back fast." "I will," Jacob promised. He rode away, leaving the cabin behind. As he traveled the frozen path into town, he kept thinking about the woman sitting by his fire. He didn't know much about her life, but he could see she carried pain the way he did, silently, bravely, without complaint. He wondered what her husband had been like, what her people were like, how she survived all these days alone in the cold. When Jacob arrived in town, he bought flour, salt, dried beans, and fresh candles. The shopkeeper, A thin man with sharp eyes chatted about the weather. Storm last week scattered the Apache camps again, the man said. Some folks been saying there are widows wandering the woods alone. Dangerous time to be out. Don't created. Jacob stiffened slightly. He kept his face calm. Anyone found? He asked, trying to sound casual. Not yet. But people are keeping watch. Last thing we need is trouble. Near the settlement. Jacob nodded and paid for his supplies. He didn't want to draw attention or invite any suspicion. As he walked back to his horse, he heard two men talking near the well. Tracks near the hills, one said. Well, if they're wandering this close, someone better keep an eye out. Jacob kept walking, pretending he heard nothing. But inside, worry tightened in his chest. If anyone discovered Nita staying at his ranch, they might misunderstand and react badly. He had no intention of hiding her forever. But he needed time to make sure things stayed calm. He rode home quickly, the cold wind pushing at his back. When the cabin came into view, he felt an unexpected relief. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the small window, he saw Lily and Nita moving around the room. They looked peaceful, like they were part of the same home. When Jacob walked inside, Lily ran to him and hugged him again. Nita stood up and gave him a gentle nod. Jacob removed his coat, feeling the warmth settle into his body. How was it? Lily asked. Quiet, Jacob replied. But we might get more snow tonight. Nita looked toward the window, understanding what he meant. Snow meant danger for anyone walking alone. She knew she wouldn't survive another storm outside. Jacob unpacked the supplies. Nita helped place everything neatly in the storage cabinet. She worked silently but with purpose, as if she had done similar tasks many times before. Later in the evening, Lily sat beside Nita as they prepared a simple stew. Lily asked questions in her innocent way. Where Nita came from, what her village looked like, what her favorite season was. Nita answered softly, choosing words carefully so Lily could understand. Jacob sat at the table watching them. The cabin felt alive again, filled with small sounds, the boiling pot, Lily's laughter, Nita's calm voice. It reminded him of the days when his wife was still with them, when the home had felt warm and full of life. After dinner, the three of them sat by the fire. Lily leaned against Nita's arm again, slowly falling asleep. Nita gently brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face, her expression soft and full of care. Jacob saw the tenderness in her eyes, and it surprised him how natural it looked, how a stranger could bring such comfort to his child. Jacob cleared his throat softly. You can stay, he said, almost whispering. For a little longer, until things are safe. Nita looked at him with gratitude. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded, unsure how else to respond. He wasn't offering out of obligation anymore. He was offering because he knew the cabin felt better with her there. He felt a little less lonely. Lily felt a lot happier. And for the first time in a long while, Christmas didn't feel like a painful reminder. It felt like something worth looking forward to. Outside, the snow began to fall again, covering the land in soft white. Inside, the three sat close to the fire, sharing warmth, safety, and a quiet bond that none of them could have predicted. Jacob had no idea what the coming days would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. Lily's Christmas present had already changed their lives. The snowstorm grew stronger through the night, covering the land in layers of white that stretched far beyond the hills. Jacob had expected a quiet winter, but this one seemed colder, harsher, and far more unpredictable than the last few years. Yet, inside the cabin, the atmosphere felt strangely warm, almost peaceful. With Lily asleep on the small bed and Nita resting near the fire, Jacob sat at the table, sharpening a dull knife and letting his thoughts float between worry and comfort. By morning, the world outside had transformed again. The windows were covered with frost, creating small crystal-like patterns that Lily loved to trace with her fingers. When she woke up, the first thing she did was run to Nita, who was already awake, feeding the fire with small pieces of wood she had gathered the day before. "You woke up early," Lily said in her cheerful morning voice. Nita smiled softly, nodding. "Keep fire warm." Jacob stood from his place near the stove and gave the two a small nod. "Good morning." The day began slowly, as most winter days did. Jacob checked outside and confirmed what he already suspected. They were snowed in. The storm had blocked most of the small path leading away from the cabin. Not that he had been planning to leave. With the tension in town and talk of Apache tracks near the hills, he knew it was better to stay put for now. Inside, Lily and Nita spent the morning talking in simple words, mostly with gestures. Nita showed Lily how to braid threads more tightly, how to fold cloth in neat shapes, and even taught her a few harmless Apache words that made Lily giggle when she tried to repeat them. Jacob watched from the side, pretending to be busy with woodwork, but in truth, he was quietly observing the growing bond between the two. At one point, Lily ran to Jacob holding a small cloth braid. "Nita showed me how to make this. Look, Daddy." Jacob took it in his hands, turning it gently. "It's beautiful," he said honestly. Lily beamed with pride and ran back to Nita, as if reporting her victory. Throughout the day, the three worked together around the cabin. Nita helped prepare food. Lily arranged firewood into neat stacks, and Jacob repaired loose hinges and strengthened the door against the cold winds. Every time Jacob tried to show Nita she didn't need to work so hard, she only shook her head and continued. Helping seemed to give her purpose, and Jacob respected that. In the afternoon, while the stew simmered in the pot, Jacob decided to speak more openly with Nita. They sat at the table, the warm scent of food filling the air, and Lily humming softly as she played near the hearth. "You must miss your people," Jacob said gently. Nita lowered her gaze and nodded. "Yes. Miss family. Miss home." Her voice carried a quiet sadness, but no bitterness. Jacob wanted to offer comfort, but he wasn't sure what to say. He remembered how he felt when his wife passed away, lost, confused, overwhelmed. And he imagined Nita's pain might be just as heavy, even if she carried it without complaint. He admired her strength, but he also felt a growing worry. If someone from her tribe came looking for her, or if someone from the town discovered her, things could become complicated. Later, while Lily napped, Nita sat near the window, watching the falling snow. Jacob sat beside her, sharpening his tools, but his attention wandered toward her quiet presence. "You don't have to stay forever," Jacob said softly. "I know you must have people searching for you." Nita looked at him with thoughtful eyes. It took her a moment to respond. "Storm big. Hard to go. Danger out." She hesitated, then added, "Here. Safe." Jacob nodded slowly. Her words were simple, but the meaning was clear. She felt safer in his cabin than in the wilderness, at least for now. He couldn't deny the truth in that. As the evening approached, the storm finally began to calm. The wind quieted, and the snowfall slowed to a soft drifting, like feathers floating from the sky. Jacob decided to step outside for a moment, to check the horses and observe the surroundings. The air was icy and still, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears. When he returned, he found Lily and Nita sitting close to the fire. Nita had braided Lily's hair into 2 neat strands, and Lily looked extremely proud of the new style. "Daddy, look what she did," Lily said, turning her head left and right so he could see. Jacob smiled. A real smile, not forced, not tired, but warm. "Looks very nice." He noticed Nita watching Lily affectionately, and something about that soft gaze struck him deeply. It had been a long time since he had seen anyone show motherly affection toward his child. His chest tightened with a mixture of bittersweet memories and unexpected comfort. After dinner, Lily asked Nita to tell her a story. Nita hesitated, unsure if her English was good enough, but Lily encouraged her eagerly. Jacob sat at the table, listening. Nita spoke slowly, her voice calm and gentle, telling a simple traditional tale about a small bird who protected its home from a winter storm by singing to the wind. Lily listened with wide eyes, completely drawn into the story. Even Jacob found himself leaning closer, wanting to hear every word. When the story ended, Lily clapped softly and hugged Nita around the waist. "You tell stories like Mama used to," she whispered. Nita froze for a moment, touched by the child's innocent words. She placed a careful hand on Lily's head and whispered something in her own language, a soft blessing. Jacob watched the exchange, feeling a complicated swirl of emotions. He didn't want to trouble Nita, but he also didn't want Lily to cling too tightly. Still, he couldn't deny the good Nita brought into the cabin. Just before bedtime, Jacob stepped outside one more time to check for tracks in the snow. The storm had erased most traces from the previous day, but fresh prints could form overnight. He didn't want any surprises. The sky was clearer than before, but with that clarity came an unease he couldn't name. When he returned inside, Nita was covering Lily with an extra blanket, while the girl slept peacefully, holding the braided cloth she made earlier. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with gentle warmth. Jacob stood near the doorway, watching Nita's careful movements. "You have a kind heart," he said quietly. Nita turned to him, surprised. "I only help." "You helped more than you know," Jacob said. She looked down, shy yet grateful. She spoke again, after a moment of thought. "Your home. Very warm." Jacob chuckled softly. "Most days it feels too empty." Nita met his eyes with a soft expression. Not empty now. Those simple words hit deeper than he expected. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. As the night settled, Jacob lay awake on his bed, listening to the soft breaths of his daughter and the quiet crackling of the fire. He thought about the town's rumors, the danger of being discovered, and the uncertain days ahead. But he also thought about Lily's laughter, Nita's gentle presence, and the unexpected warmth filling the cabin. It had been so long since he felt anything close to peace. He didn't want this moment to end too soon. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Maybe this Christmas won't be so lonely after all." Little did he know that the peace inside the cabin would soon be challenged. Outside, beyond the hills and frozen trees, others were also searching the land, people who knew Nita, people who feared she might be lost forever. And those people were heading closer each day. The next morning came with a strange silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a blanket of thick snow that softened every sound. The world outside the cabin looked untouched, as if no footprints had ever crossed the land. Jacob stepped outside carefully, his boots sinking deep with each step. The cold air brushed against his face, reminding him that winter was far from over. Inside the cabin, Lily and Nita were already awake. Lily was humming a soft tune while helping Nita fold blankets. The scene warmed Jacob's heart. For the first time in many months, the cabin felt like a real home again. But Jacob also felt a quiet pressure building inside him. The storm had brought peace, but now that it had cleared, the world beyond his land would begin moving again. Rumors in town, searching parties, and wandering scouts, everything would start again. He returned inside and brushed the snow off his coat. Lily looked up and smiled brightly. "Daddy!" Nita made breakfast. Jacob's eyes shifted toward Nita, who was stirring a pot over the fire. She gave him a small, shy smile. He nodded gratefully. "Smells good." They ate together in simple silence. Lily talked about the story Nita had told her the night before, repeating parts of it with excitement, trying to imitate Nita's gentle tone. Nita listened patiently, correcting a few words softly and smiling at the girl's effort. Jacob watched the two of them and felt a mixture of pride and worry. He didn't want anything to disturb this peace, but he knew it couldn't last forever. After breakfast, Jacob went outside again to check the surroundings more carefully. The snow was deep enough to cover old tracks, but fresh enough to reveal new ones. He circled the cabin slowly, scanning the area. Everything seemed normal until he walked toward the fence on the west side of his land. There, half-covered footprints trailed across the snow. They weren't his. They weren't Lily's. And they weren't from any animal. They were human tracks. Jacob crouched down and studied them closely. The size of the tracks suggested 2 or 3 adults, and the spacing of the steps showed they were moving with purpose. They must have passed nearby early that morning or late in the night when the snow had slowed. Jacob felt a twinge of concern tighten in his chest. If they were townsmen, they would have approached the cabin. If they were travelers, they might have left marks in other places. But these prints were careful, purposeful, and quiet traits he recognized. These were Apache tracks. Scouts. He stood slowly and scanned the horizon. Nothing moved, except the drifting snowflakes. But he knew scouts could move silently and stay hidden easily. If they were searching for someone, it wouldn't take long before they reached the cabin. He returned inside quickly, removing his boots at the door. Nita noticed his worried expression immediately. "What is wrong?" she asked softly. Jacob hesitated, not wanting to alarm Lily. He motioned for Nita to step closer, and she followed him to the corner of the cabin. "I found tracks," Jacob whispered. "Apache tracks." Nita's eyes widened. For a moment, she looked both relieved and afraid. "My people," she said quietly. Jacob nodded. "Maybe, but I don't know if they're friendly, cautious, or desperate. I don't want anyone frightened." Nita lowered her gaze. "They look for me." Jacob took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Nita hesitated, and then said something he didn't expect. "If danger come, I go. To keep you safe." "Not." Jacob shook his head firmly. "You're not going anywhere alone. Not in this weather. Not with the mountains full of snow." Nita looked touched by his words, but she didn't argue further. The day passed slowly, filled with a quiet tension. Lily sensed something was different, but didn't understand what it was. She stayed close to Nita, playing with her hair braids and asking for more stories. Nita tried to smile and keep the girl calm, but her eyes often darted toward the windows, watching the snow-covered world outside. In the afternoon, Jacob chopped wood near the cabin door. Every crack of the axe echoed strangely across the quiet valley. He kept glancing toward the hills, expecting movement at any moment. By late afternoon, the sky turned a muted shade of gray, signaling that evening was on its way. Jacob brought the firewood inside and placed it near the stove. Lily helped him by carrying the smaller pieces. Nita prepared tea, trying to keep her hands steady, even though her heart beat faster than usual. Just as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jacob heard something, a distant crunch of snow. Not too close, but not too far either. He stood still, listening. The sound came again. Slow, careful, deliberate steps. Jacob stepped outside, signaling Nita to stay inside with Lily. He didn't take his rifle out to threaten anyone. He only carried it because winter days sometimes demanded caution. The cold air stung his face as he stepped into the open. He scanned the tree line carefully, his breath forming white clouds. Then he saw movement. 3 figures emerged from behind the trees, walking slowly but confidently toward the ranch. They wore winter-wrapped clothing, and their posture was unmistakable Apache scouts. Jacob tightened his grip on the rifle not to raise it, but simply to steady his nerves. When the scouts saw Jacob, they paused, exchanging glances. Then the oldest among them stepped forward. He lifted his hand in a gesture of peace. Jacob lowered his rifle slightly and nodded. The scout spoke first. "We search for one of ours. A widow. Missing after storm." Jacob inhaled slowly. This moment had come sooner than he expected. "She is safe," Jacob said. "She is here." The scouts shared a brief look, one of relief. The oldest nodded with deep respect. "You kept her warm. You saved her life." Jacob felt tension ease from his shoulders. These scouts were not in attack mode. They were calm, grateful, and respectful. "You may see her," Jacob said, stepping aside. Nita appeared at the door, Lily holding her hand tightly. When the scouts saw her, their expressions softened. One of them, a younger scout, stepped forward. "Nita," he said with emotion, "we feared you gone to the winter." Nita nodded respectfully, speaking softly in her language. The scouts listened attentively. Jacob couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, gratitude, relief, and reassurance. Lily didn't let go of Nita's hand, her small eyes watching everything with curiosity and a hint of fear. When the scouts noticed Lily's presence, they exchanged a surprised look but did not show any hostility. Jacob stepped closer, choosing his words carefully. "She has been with us through the storms. My daughter brought her home so she would not freeze." The scouts nodded again, as if understanding the unusual circumstance. The oldest scout placed a hand on his chest. "Your kindness is seen. Our people will not forget." Jacob relaxed a little. "Does she need to leave now?" The oldest man looked at Nita. "She chooses." Nita looked at Jacob, then at Lily. The girl's hand tightened around hers, her eyes welling with sadness at the idea of Nita leaving. Nita's expression was filled with warmth and conflict. She looked toward the scouts again, and after a long, thoughtful silence, she gave a simple answer. "I stay. For now. Winter too strong." The scouts nodded respectfully, accepting her choice. "We return later," the oldest said. "When paths clear." Jacob thanked them quietly. The scouts turned and disappeared into the snowy trees as silently as they had come. When Jacob closed the cabin door, Lily immediately hugged Nita tightly, relieved she wasn't leaving that night. Jacob looked at Nita and saw the same relief in her eyes. She had a choice, and she chose to stay. Not from fear, but from something deeper, something neither she nor Jacob could explain yet. The cabin, once again, filled with a sense of quiet warmth, stronger than before. The night after the scouts left was unusually calm. The wind outside had softened into a gentle whistle, almost musical as it moved through the trees. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed warmly, painting soft light across the wooden walls. Jacob sat near the table, gently mending a leather strap, but his eyes kept drifting toward Nita and Lily, who were curled together near the fire. Lily leaned against Nita's arm, her eyelids heavy with sleep, but she fought to stay awake as Nita stroked her hair with a mother-like tenderness. Jacob felt a strange mixture of peace and uncertainty. Nita's decision to stay for the winter had lifted a weight from his chest, though he wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was because Lily needed her, or maybe it was because he needed someone to fill the quiet spaces of his home, someone who understood silence without fearing it. When Lily finally fell asleep, Nita carefully carried her to the small bed and covered her with blankets. Jacob watched quietly, noticing again how natural Nita moved around his home, as if she had always belonged in that space. When she returned to the fire, Jacob cleared his throat softly. "You can rest too," he said gently. "It's been a long day." Nita shook her head with a faint smile. Jacob set the leather strap aside and leaned back in his chair. "About everything," she said softly. "My people. They are safe. They search for me. They worry. But here, this home, feels warm." She paused as if searching for the right words. "It feels peaceful." Jacob nodded slowly. "It's been a long time since this place felt peaceful." Nita looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "Your wife? She kept this place warm?" Jacob swallowed hard. He didn't often talk about his wife, not because he wanted to forget her, but because it hurt too much to remember. Yet with Nita, it felt different, gentle, not painful. She did, he said quietly. She was the heart of this home. After she passed, everything felt empty. Lily tried to be strong, but it's not easy for a child. He looked toward the small bed where Lily slept soundly. You brought something back. Something this house lost. Nita's eyes softened. She didn't respond with words, but her silence held warmth. As the fire crackled softly, time passed in a slow, comforting rhythm. Eventually, both fell asleep, Jacob in his chair, Nita resting lightly on the floor near the fire. The next morning brought pale sunlight and a surprising break in the snowfall. The sky was clear, the air cold but calm. Jacob took this as a good chance to shovel a path around the cabin. Nita insisted on helping despite the cold, and together they made slow but steady progress. Lily followed them around, trying to scoop small piles of snow with a wooden spoon she found amusingly helpful. It was tiring work, but it brought a sense of normal life, simple, shared tasks that felt grounding. As they worked, Jacob noticed Nita watching the horizon with thoughtful eyes. Thinking again? He asked, with a small smile. She nodded. Storms end, sun comes. Maybe my people come again soon. Jacob leaned on his shovel, looking toward the same horizon. If they come, they're welcome to talk. But you don't have to leave before you're ready. Nita gave him a grateful look. Why you help me so much? Jacob thought for a long moment before answering. Maybe because someone helped me once when I was lost. And maybe because Lily sees something good in you. And maybe... He hesitated, then finished softly. Because it feels right. Nita didn't reply in words, but her expression said enough. Inside the cabin, Nita taught Lily how to make small woven patterns with leftover cloth. Lily laughed every time, her hands tangled the threads, and Nita patiently fixed them. Jacob watched with quiet contentment as he fixed one of the chair legs. In the afternoon, they all shared a simple meal. The conversation was light, Lily telling stories about imaginary creatures in the woods, Jacob correcting her gently, and Nita laughing softly at the child's creativity. Hours passed effortlessly. When evening came, the last light of day painted the cabin in golden shades. Lily sat near the window, drawing little shapes on the frosted glass. Jacob sat at the table, carving a small wooden horse. Nita stood near the fire, her face warm and thoughtful. Then, a soft knock echoed at the door. Jacob stiffened instantly, placing the carving knife aside. Nita gently pulled Lily close. The knock came again, calm, not forceful. Jacob opened the door slowly. 2 Apache scouts stood outside, but this time their faces showed no worry. They bowed their heads politely. We come to speak, the older one said. Jacob nodded and allowed them to enter. They stepped inside with quiet respect, their eyes scanning the room but showing no threat. Nita approached, and the scouts spoke to her in their language. Lily watched curiously, still holding Nita's hand tightly. Jacob observed the exchange, trying to read their expressions. After a moment, Nita turned to Jacob. Her voice was steady but emotional. They say, my village is together again. They build shelter near the river. They want me to come. If I wish. Jacob nodded slowly. He had expected this, but the thought of her leaving filled him with an unexpected ache. Lily's face fell immediately. She grabbed Nita's arm tightly. Please don't go, she whispered. Nita knelt beside her. Little one, my people love me too. They look for me. They worry. I must see them. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, and she shook her head. Nita cupped Lily's cheeks gently. You are my gift too. Jacob felt his heart tightening. He didn't want Lily to lose someone again. And he didn't want the cabin to return to emptiness after it had just begun to feel alive again. But he knew Nita had her own life, her own people, her own roots. "Do what you must," Jacob said softly. "You owe us nothing." Nita looked at him, really looked, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. She loved her people, but she also felt connected to this small family who had sheltered her, fed her, and accepted her without fear. She turned back to the scouts and spoke in her language again. They listened carefully, then nodded with understanding. One scout smiled gently before they turned to leave. When the door closed, Nita remained still, her hand still holding Lily's. Jacob approached her quietly. "You're leaving in the morning?" Nita shook her head slowly. "No, I choose." Jacob blinked. "Choose what?" "I stay," Nita whispered. "For winter. Maybe longer. My people understand. They know I am safe. They say, I follow my heart." Lily squealed with joy, hugging Nita so tightly she nearly fell backward. Jacob let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The cabin felt warm again, warmer than ever. Later that night, as the fire crackled softly, Lily slept peacefully between Jacob and Nita. Snowflakes drifted gently outside, but the storm of uncertainty had passed. Nita looked around the cabin, then at Jacob. "Your home is my home too?" Jacob nodded slowly, warmth filling his chest. "If that's what you want." Nita smiled softly, a smile full of gratitude, trust, and a new sense of belonging. And from that winter onward, the small cabin on the snowy land was never lonely again. Lily had someone to teach her stories and braids. Jacob had someone who filled the silence with gentle presence. And Nita had found a new place, a warm place where she was not a lost widow but part of a family. The Christmas Lily once feared would be lonely became the beginning of something new, something healing, something that felt like a miracle the snow had delivered quietly to their door. And every year after, Lily proudly told the same story. "The best Christmas gift I ever brought home wasn't wrapped. She walked beside me through the snow.